What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Hollywood Already Did It presents Marvel Pair-Ups, the history of the Marvel movies that aren't part of the MCU. As always, I'm your host, Blake Schultz, and with me is Jamie Girard.
Hello.
And Terrence Tatum.
Hello, everyone.
And if you are new to the show, what you probably don't know is that we're going to watch every episode of What If and pair it up with a piece of Marvel's cinematic history before the MCU debuted, and these other multiversal stories and how these movies came to be and what they did and what their influence was. We've already done Blade, which might be the most influential of all for the modern ones, as far back to the 1944 Captain America serial, a lot of Hulk, and we're going to do more of it today. And right before we get started, I'm going to ask my two co-hosts a question. Do you guys stare at the Zoom screen or the camera lens when you are talking on these things?
I usually look at myself.
Yeah,
great.
I use myself as the center. I don't.
Good.
I hardly ever look at the camera lens.
Yeah, same.
I just did it for the first time and was like, I bet it looks weird, or it's how you're supposed to do
like,
it.
Hi guys.
It's like, is that their eye contact to the audience, or is it here? We'll never know. But of course, we are at the 5th episode of Marvel's What If. We are halfway through the series, which I just think is a shame because I'm quite enjoying this. And we are finally at what I think was a lot of people's most anticipated episode, What If Zombies? Taking from a lot of the Marvel Zombies comics that have been popular for years now and have always been a great time. Just in time for Halloween, almost. Kind of don't know why we didn't wait. That could have timed up, but
yeah.
Who cares, right? It's September. Let's start watching Scream.
Let's
and
put on the
horror
horror movies
comedies
now.
And Malignant's out. I mean, let's get
Let's
spooky.
do it.
But what did we think of the episode?
I'm not really a zombie person. I don't like zombie stuff very much. So it was like that didn't really interest me. But then once we got to Zombie Wanda, as like the biggest Wanda fan, I was like, oh, okay, Zombie Wanda. I thought I loved that, like, just how much like WandaVision love we're getting this year, and that in like this universe he would kind of give it all up for her. I enjoyed that aspect of it, and it was a fun team, like to see Kurt with like Bucky, and it was a weird combo. I like that it started at the beginning of Infinity War and then just totally left turned. I like the train stuff because one of the few zombie movies I actually like is Train to Busan. It was fun. I mean, it's kind of the same every week. I'm like, yep, that was good. Sure. I'll never watch it again, probably.
I am a zombie. I'm a zombie whore. I love zombie. I'll consume everything zombie. 28 days later, feed it into my veins. So this was right up my alley. And yeah, I love that it started at Infinity War, and I died laughing when Ebony Maw and then just started getting just annihilated. I was like, this took a wild turn, and I am here for it. Like, that was fantastic to me. And kind of seeing it in shadows, and you're like, is this what I think this is happening? And all of a sudden you're like, nope, these are zombies. And I love the whole sort of battle with we keep putting Mark Ruffalo through hell. Hulk is just not hulking even in this version still. And so that was kind of fun to use him sort of as the catalyst that told the story, as he's the only one not powered, but also one of the only few that's not bitten. That was fun to see and kind of go around. Like she said, this very band of misfits, because none of these folks actually have ever seen each other in our timeline that we've seen or had worked as a team together. So that was fun. But I did really love at the end where that was Vision was like, I'm doing this off of love. I'm like, yeah, y'all, I love y'all great and all, but still, that's my boo, and I'm gonna do everything for her. I love even with the world endings. Like, nope, don't care. She and
I agree. I mean, I've obviously enjoyed it. We're once again doing the thing that all 5 episodes have done, where I just want more. I want the other 30 minutes we're not getting, but it is interesting to see the Hulk still not hulking out. Clearly, whatever he's going through in Infinity War is still happening here. They're not getting along. I don't know what it would take to get that out. We have everything that you guys mentioned. Our Train to Busan is always great. I love seeing Spider-Man and Wasp together. Obviously, give me all of the Spider-Man What If episodes you want. I want to see him in that cloak way more. I loved his video blog about surviving the apocalypse. The thing that I did not really love in Civil War was Spider-Man being this Star Wars geek. Have you seen this old movie about it? And that's just such a long bit. He has to go through like the entire plot of Empire Strikes Back for a joke. But once we kind of establish that he's just a movie geek, and in our Infinity War, he's like, well, have you seen Alien? And then we just do Alien. And then here where he like knows the rules and he gets it, I was like, oh, this is great. We do just have this kid who is getting Grindhouse VHS tapes, watching every movie he could find, who is now plugged into the modern world of vlogs and how to do this and is integrating that into his superheroics. And I am all about that. I think it's interesting that we're now doing our second episode where it's basically like, did you know that if things weren't perfect, the Pims would destroy us?
Yeah, I'm like, the Pims will go left real fast.
You know what did bother me? I was annoyed that that Hope got bit, but then they kept her suit on. Take her suit off because she's going to be a dangerous zombie. Because all these Avenger zombies still have their powers. Why are you just leaving her with her suit on?
If you take her out of the suit, you will be fine.
Yeah, I thought that was really frustrating.
You know what? That was like the weird disconnect for me because I can't think of another zombie superhero example, and I don't know that we have one outside of these comics and outside of this episode. But there was something a little weird about like how coordinated they were doing like Doctor Strange magic and Iron Man suit stuff. And
yeah,
that was like a bit of a disconnect to me. And I wanted more horror. Like this was a slapstick funny episode.
It was like funnier than the last.
It was like Shaun of the Dead style zombie stuff. And yeah, I'm with you too. I had that same conversation with my wife post. She's also not really into zombie movies, but I'm like, I know these movies well enough that I can't think of a time where once you're bitten, you keep the cognizance of your brain. You're like, I know how to do my spells and I know how to do my powers. And I was like, that feels like I should have something else told to me to explain why that is still there. Because otherwise, it's like, this doesn't quite make sense. But sure.
And in some ways, I don't mind it. Like the zombie's going to figure out the Iron Man suit. He's going to figure out how to use a shield. And
it's more sort of strange. Like, it's more sort of Strange and Wong. That's kind of like, that seems like that would stop working. And Wanda too.
And there's like instinct.
Yeah. I
also will say I didn't really like the ending. I didn't like that it ended on Zombie Thanos. Xanos. I don't know. That ending didn't really work for me.
Same. And and you know, we've done a lot of like, but where's the third act? And some of it you can figure out, right? Like the end of the Hank Pym episode 3, we're like, okay, they're gonna get Captain Marvel and Captain America, and they're gonna go rock Loki and his army. Great. The end of Captain Carter, you go, okay, well now she's gonna go do Avengers stuff. T'Challa's, I think, it also had a big tease of like, well, Kurt Russell's now here. All of these almost felt more just like, okay, cool, like we're gonna keep going. But there was something about the way they showed the zombie Thanos that I was like, oh, this just needs a part 2.
I was like, is there a sequel to this? Yeah.
Because and the way he like frames it up and everything, there was just something about how it was shot that I more than any other episode needed the resolution. And I think part of that is also it's a weird disconnect of like, I was thinking about it during the episode of where is Thanos? Well, he's going to go to nowhere with the Guardians and get the Reality Stone. But then all he knows is that the other 2 stones are on Earth, which means that, we can safely assume that zombie Doctor Strange didn't go to Titan to fight him. So He must have arrived differently when he figured out Maul was dead, got the time stone, and then went to Wakanda anyways to get bit. Like there was all of a sudden pieces of it that I'm not even frustrated that we don't know. I just really want to know. And then there's the Thor of it all.
Yeah, Thor's not in there at all. Yeah.
And that's where I was like, oh, awesome. They're going to get to Wakanda and Thor's going to come down and he's not even going to care about the stones. He's going to be like, we got to stop this virus. And then Thanos is going to get him and the snap's still going to happen. But it might just be to get rid of the zombies. Because a part of me was like, oh, he's not going to get rid of all life now. He's going to kill all the infected people. That's going to become Thanos's like agency. And that's going to be the tragedy of this. And then we just were like, well, now what?
Yeah.
Like, Because it is like, well, how are they gonna Hank Pym's or the Hank Pym, Paul Rudd's head, Spider-Man, half of like Black Panther's
I said Ben Panther was like one leg in
annihilated.
it. Yeah.
I did not
Yeah,
expect
like
him for Chadwick, and that was really nice.
That was pleasing. All of a sudden I was like, oh
I
wait,
think
he's
we're gonna
still
get
here.
more of that than we realize now. Which I also was like, oh, I really like teed that up to be the end. And I'm glad that it's not, but I am now like, okay, cool. How much more am I getting? Because it's just when he says the we remember the dead and they're still with us. I'm like, oh, it's just every line is gonna hurt more and more.
Yeah, it's like ripping a band-aid off slowly. Like, stop, please.
Yeah.
And I feel like the Star Wars episode should have been his last. Like they should have because it doesn't really matter the order. And
reordered
like,
it. Yeah.
I feel like that should have been his final.
His episode should have been the last thing that we sort of seen, because now kind of it's like, oh well, here's a little bit extra. Like we're getting bonus scenes, but that was a great finale for him.
Yeah, I think this was this was a really good episode, but it was the one that left me wanting the most. Because even things like Zombie Cap was done so quick, and I was like, ooh, but I want. Come on, let's do 60-minute long episodes. We're good for it. We can do it. Like, just give me that extra 20 minutes. I'm like, oh, we need it. Unless these are just the universes we'll be in, and season 2 will be a Captain Carter sequel, a Star-Lord sequel,
Or
a
it's a
zombie
one-to-one
sequel.
each. Yeah.
Which would be fine. But like, I still think that Hank Pym one is my favorite. The murder mystery is just.
I think it's my favorite too.
It's right up my alley.
It's both zombies, I guess, is a genre changer too, but it's a genre changer, and it feels like it's the most unknown. Whereas a lot of these other things, are kind of like, yeah, this is where this part takes place, and we're kind of following. We're just picking up the pieces and going left. That one was like, what is happening? So I think that was why that one sticks out a bit more than the other ones do.
Yeah, and it was the most. This is probably the biggest departure story-wise because zombies, but it's so big that it's not surprising. We're like, what if Hank Pym was a serial killer? Is like, oh man, this is great.
Yeah,
that's such a shift to everything without being just like vampires are here now.
Yeah,
that it feels a little more grounded in a way. But enough about that episode. Let's get into some Marvel history. This week, we are doing a property that I really like and a movie that I think is fine. We're going to be talking about the Japanese Spider-Man television show, just really called Spider-Man here, I believe. And that's influence, as well as 2003 Ang Lee's Hulk. And if you've been following our show, we're jumping a little past the Spider-Man movies and the X-Men movies, but we'll get there probably next week, because that's going to obviously be huge. It's X-Men and Spider-Man. But before we can talk about the Spider-Man movies, we do need to talk about this Spider-Man show and its giant influence on both Japanese television and American television, and really both cultures in such a giant way that it's almost astounding that this happy little accident has really gotten us where we are now. So produced by the Toei Company, TOEI, in May 1978, running only 41 episodes until March of 1979, they developed a Spider-Man television show off of a very weird contract where Marvel and Toei could basically take any property of either's that they wanted and do whatever they wanted.
I've at it.
And if that sounds weird to you, it is really because at the time, everybody's belief was our brands don't really matter. American audiences will never see Japanese Spider-Man. How would that even be possible? We don't have DVDs, the internet, streaming, the ability to broadcast this. Go wild.
Yeah.
Marvel really only used it to bring over a few robots into some of their comic adaptations. And the Toei Company made a Spider-Man television show that has one of the most comic book accurate suits and nothing else that's accurate about it.
Ooh, it's weird.
I love this show.
I wish that all the episodes were available, because I would watch every single second of it. It's so crazy.
Yeah.
They used to be available on Marvel's website and have since been taken down and are now very, very hard to find. Have you guys watched this before, or is this your first hodgepodge of YouTube clips?
This was my first hodgepodge of YouTube clips, and it was first of all, it was like shocking how similar to Power Rangers was, and it makes sense because that's like Japan. And I totally see how this influenced Power Rangers. The weirdest moment though, like when knowing that like he came from like Planet Spider, and that's how, and then he bit him or just gave him the powers, was so bizarre. But then like he became Jesus, the space spider guy who gave him his powers, like was also Jesus. And that's where I was like, what is happening? I need to see this in order and not just in clips. I'm so confused. And I love that lady villain, very Rita Repulsa, very like, she was like a sexy villain. I want more. Give me the DVD set, please.
Yeah, I love these shows because it's very much Power Rangers, Ultraman, the live action Turtles. Like they're all this is the grandfather to those. And it's interesting because they shoot all of these in 1 year, and then it's like, we'll air them whenever the hell we want to, like out of order.
This one has a funny piece of its production in that the robot they were using, Leopardon, got stolen halfway through production, which is why they just reuse footage. They didn't make another robot. They didn't find it. They just used what they had.
But it's amazing how many.
Who stole it?
No.
Wow.
Of course not. But it's always amazing with those, because those shows always do that type of shortcut stuff. Like something like that happens, or they're like, we don't have the budget. Let's repurpose this scene 14 times in the rest of these episodes. Like no one will notice. Guys, we notice.
I mean, the Dragon Zord destroys the same bay every
week.
That man rebuilds his entire life.
He is a determined man.
Just to hear that flute come on.
Like that's always my jam. But yeah, this was weird show. I love it. I still, every time that I see the suit come on through the motorcycle and he just like sucks into his body, I'm like, okay, sure. Someone somewhere looked at the Spider-Man comic book, was like, cool, I want that outfit, and then just burn the rest of the comics. Like, I don't give a shit about anything else.
Well, it was such an interesting thing because they really had no idea how to market this to a young Japanese audience. And the Japanese producers really believed that it ultimately wouldn't work, which is why they were like, give him a motorcycle. We got to get space in there. The giant robot will work. They just started repurposing all of this with zero awareness of who this character even was. They just did it. But you're right. A UFO crash lands on Earth, and a motorcyclist follows his dad in and talks to Garia, who's the last patron of the planet Spider, and then gives him his blood, allowing him to get spider powers and a bracelet that creates his suit, his web slingers, and of course summons Leopardon, the giant Spider-Man robot, which will be in Spider-Verse 2, apparently. So get ready.
That's exciting.
Yes.
Very, very excited for that. And naturally, this was one of the first times we had seen a giant robot like this that fought a monster. The monster got bigger. They summoned the robot. And if that sounds familiar to you, it is because it is just simply the template for the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. This got adapted into Super Sentai, which is the literal blueprint for Power Rangers, until we took that to the States and made what it is today. Again, repurposing footage from even Super Sentai for our own purposes. They shot all of that in a park in Burbank, and then just copy and pasted some other stuff. And it worked. I think anybody who knows the 90s, anybody who grew up at that time, knows that, of course, Power Rangers was a phenomenon that is on my desk to this day with tiny little toys. And that influenced Terrence is right. We had the Power Rangers, the Turtles had come out, and everything started to kind of influence each other for kids and for adults. And some of the action and sparring and the way they moved is kind of what ended up getting molded into the Spider-Man movies that we had from Sam Raimi. In a very strange way, we sent Spider-Man overseas, and then when he came back, we went, we're going to take some of this, and we're going to throw it into this movie, and it's going to be awesome. The show, of course, spawned one feature film for themselves overseas, and nothing much here except for a giant television show that changed toys, comics, cartoons. When you really sit down and think about like the influence of Power Rangers in general, even in the toys, this was some of the first kind of toyetic things that had the articulation they did that would then directly influence the Spider-Man Classics toy line, which they would need to get the movie moving. So even the weird kind of brand awareness at how to get kids came from this entity. And I think it's great. I really am hoping it finds its way on Disney Plus. I feel like it'll show up somewhere if we really are getting him in Spider-Verse 2. Obviously, this is the character we need in Spider-Man No Way Home, way more than Tobey or Andrew. If the third act of this movie had a giant robot show up,
I'm sold.
it would be the best Marvel movie ever made.
Ever.
Really.
Ever.
I mean, like, this is all I want now. I just want to see that Doc Ock tentacle, that pumpkin ball roll, and then I want Leopardon to come in overseas. I don't know why that's complicated or hard to do, Marvel. You've done so many other things, but the one thing you haven't been able to do is make a solo Hulk film since The Incredible Hulk, which is my transition into the history of the Hulk movie.
Yeah, I like it. Well done.
Before we do that, how do you guys feel about Ang Lee's Hulk? Jamie, I'll let you start because I feel like you're going to be more positive than either of us.
So I watched it this week for the first time since theaters. So the last time I watched this movie, I was 13, and I remembered hating it. I thought it was terrible when I was 13. So and even like the 2008 Hulk, I'm kind of lukewarm on, whatever. So I rewatched it, and honestly, it was better than I remembered. And I think it's because it's aged into like kind of a fun campiness. Some of it reminded me of the first Raimi Spider-Man. And I really love how it's all edited into the comic book panels. I think that's fun. My biggest problem with it, honestly, is like it's just not a fun movie overall. It's boring. I used to love Eric Bana. Oh, he had that run of Troy and Munich when I was like 13, 14, and I was like so into him. And he's just like, he's so low energy and like dull as Hulk, as Bruce. Jennifer Connelly's good. I feel like Jennifer Connelly to Liv Tyler is a very lateral move, just like Sam Elliott to William Hurt's a very lateral move. The best upgrade is Josh Lucas to Adrian Pasdar as General Talbot. But of course, I'm going to bring up Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. But ultimately, I didn't dislike it as much as I thought I would. And I rewatched the 2008 Hulk right after just for comparison. And in the end, I gave them both a 3. I don't think the 2003 is much worse than the 2008. It's like, it's not one I'm going to watch again for another 10, 15 years. But it's not
the 50th year.
Yeah, it's not as bad as I remembered.
So the 2000, I remember this because I was working in a movie theater, and like this was a huge thing because X-Men, we'll talk about it later, but X-Men 2 was the same year. And so it's like, oh man, we got 2 Marvel films coming out at the same time, and X-Men 1 was the bee's knees. Everybody loved it. People were really excited.
A simple time where we were like, wow, 2 Marvel movies in
the
summer.
Same year. It's just unorthodox. Like that would never happen. But yeah, and
no, we would never get 4 TV shows, 4 movies, and
yeah. And I remember like loving X-Men 2, and I was like, okay, Hulk's next. And I love the old TV series at the time. Now rewatching it, I can see that there were some issues, and I don't know I loved it as much as I did. But Hulk was a character. I was like, all right, cool. Go ahead and watch this in. My issue, and I dug a good deal of this film. But my big issue was, because I think what he was trying to do was be like a Greek tragedy, like a father-son type of thing. And I think that works. This movie was released in the summer in June. And for the first 40 minutes of the film, we don't see Hulk. So there's a bit of a problem when you're trying to do a summer action vehicle and the main character that's on every poster looking like a pretty weird Shrek version, because I don't like the design of this Hulk at all. But you don't see him for 40 minutes in. And then the first time that you see him again after that, he's fighting dogs.
He shreds those dogs.
He does. And it's just like, I don't know what this film, it gets the beats of who Banner is and like the psychosis of him going in like the trap door. I love that. I dig the wipes and the comic panels. I was like, oh, Ang Lee went for something stylish, and I kind of dig that. it's just really, really one note and kind of monotone and boring for a great deal of this film. And until that last act sequence where he's running through the desert and just getting larger and larger, I kind of just like, I have checked out of this movie a long time ago. And I enjoy the '08 Hulk a little bit more, maybe because it still does feel like the old Hulk show where it's kind of slow paced, but there is actual action beats in there. This doesn't really have it for me, so it's a mixed bag. I like Sam Elliott a lot. Like Sam Elliott can do no wrong for me, so he's great in this. But you're right, Jennifer Connelly, who actually is typically a better actress than this, is playing it very low note. And I don't know if it's because Eric was playing it down there. He's like, well, I got to match the energy he's giving me. So we're both going to be just really down like this. Yeah. And I was like, I didn't, this is why I never watched this film again. I think the direction is there. Danny Elfman's score is actually really solid in this movie. I just don't know why if this was a movie, I always say this, if this movie was released in November or December, I think it might have gotten a slightly different reaction to audiences, because you're like, oh, I can take this as being like an Oscar or an art film. But when you release this in the heart of the summer, people burn this to the ground, and I get it.
I think that's a good observation. That's really interesting.
I don't think we were ready for a slow, melodramatic Oscar attempt experimental superhero movie in 2003. 2003 was a very interesting year because it was this movie, X2, and I believe Daredevil was right around the corner.
I think that's in the same year, yeah.
So we
which
more Marvel movies.
Yeah.
Just not a bad
I
one.
mean, you were yeah, I was like, you're at like peak Marvel and the lowest Marvel all in the same year. This is sort of the beginning of the end of, like, I don't know which chapter it would even be. If like the serial to Howard the Duck is chapter 1, and then like Blade, Spider-Man, and X-Men are chapter 2, and this is like this weird chapter 3. This is the end where it's gonna get bad until Iron Man and Batman Begins shows up.
Yeah, it was like X2 was like an anomaly. Like it didn't fit in with X2 to this day is one of my favorite comic books.
I still think it's one of the best ones of that.
Incredible movie. Yeah. It's I just watched Firestarter for the first time, and if you haven't seen that, that is X2. It's a fascinating thing to discover when you're like, oh, somebody watched Firestarter, and it was like, well, we should steal this house scene where they come outside with cops, and we'll just have Pyro do it instead.
Yeah.
It is almost a 1-to-1, but that is not what we're here to discuss. So it's, when you look at it that way, it is very odd, and I still am very like kind of whatever about this movie. It starts in the most like 2000s credits that for some reason X-Men, Spider-Man, and this movie did, where it was like close-up Dreamcast graphics of genetics, splicing jellyfish and starfish, and I hate that.
And I watched this, I was like, who? Because you're right, X-Men does the exact same thing. Who thought this was a good idea to open a film with? And then like, let me put scientific terminology here and zoom in on this word. Like, I don't give a shit.
They Hulk is kind of similar in its own.
It is. Yeah. But at least OA Hulk was like, all right, we're going to skip the whole.
Thank God.
Yeah.
We did not need to watch it all happen again.
Yeah.
That was the best thing the 08 did.
Right. It's very odd, because even that 08 Hulk, I'm like, it's fine. It got us going. It's fine.
It would be so much better if it was Ruffalo, just because then it would feel in sync with the rest of the MCU and it'd be more fun to watch.
Yeah.
And it would also be a different script because Ed Norton wouldn't have rewritten it. Who knows what that movie could have been?
Yeah.
But I just kind of echoing everything you guys have already said. There's a lot that I now respect about this movie. I'm not crazy about the wipes, especially the pregnancy circle crying one. That is just only in George Lucas's wildest dreams could we do a wipe like that. Because if there's one thing nobody really ever talks about Star Wars, it is an overuse of wipes in the edits. And this movie saw that. It was like, worked once. I don't know.
This is definitely one of those movies where you could tell that the studio was like, hey, he did Crouching Tiger. Let him do whatever he wants.
Mm-hmm. Well, Terrence, speaking of letting them do whatever they want, the history of this movie is not terribly interesting because, similar to other, like, we're now we're now in a weird place where a lot of just like the history of the movies is like sometimes it takes a long time to do. But production of this movie started in 1990, right after the death of the Incredible Hulk Lou Ferrigno TV movie, which was meant to be followed by a like smart Hulk Lou Ferrigno movie that they did not make because of Bill Bixby passing away, which we talked about last week or the week before. So naturally, everybody got together to figure this out. They kept the rights at Universal because they've been holding on to those rights. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So for longer than I've been alive, Universal's been clinging to those. So, of course, in 1990, they write a script that originally was just going to be like, he's going to fight terrorists. And everyone at Marvel was like, we're not doing that. This was right around the time we talked about where Marvel was like, we gotta, guys, like, get back to the comics. We're not doing this. So after a decade of scripts wherein he was going to fight terrorists, the Abomination, the Leader, for a while it was just 3 other scientists who were in the comics who were going to become giant insects. They finally were like, okay, summer of 1999, we'll compete against the Matrix. Why not? What could go wrong? Cameras start rolling and the movie falls apart. They bring in J.J. Abrams, Scott Alexander, and Larry Karaszewski to do rewrites of the script, trying to punch it up, add some levity and comedy. There are quotes. Yes, by now, yeah, cameras are rolling, Banna's there. They just don't have Ang Lee or the writers. But everything else is still, the cast is there. They're ready to go. And there are now quotes from all these writers being like, yeah, they didn't know what they wanted. They couldn't decide if this was a sci-fi movie, a comedy movie. There were rumors that there were talks right before cameras rolling of changing it entirely and getting either Adam Sandler or Jim Carrey to come in and just make a comedy.
Let's do The Mask again.
I mean, it worked once. So finally, in like 1998, a year before the movie's gonna be released, they go, we can't do it. This budget has reached $100 million, which I don't have the budget of what it ended up being in front of me, but that really means that Universal just took a bath. They had already spent 20 million of it on script development over the last 10 years on all these different writers. That's when pretty much everyone walked away. In 2001, Ang Lee showed up, repitched the movie that we have today, the Shakespearean tragedy, Father Son. We're gonna do it. And we just talked about our feelings about it, which are fine. And then 4 years later is when they went, let's get that sequel made. And Ang Lee said, sure, but I want to go do Brokeback Mountain instead. And there was a contract that they had to get those cameras rolling, so that got scrapped.
Thank God we got Brokeback Mountain instead. Honestly,
I mean, what a better choice.
It's a much better use of his abilities. Yes, yeah.
I would say so. So then in 2006, as we all sort of know, Marvel Entertainment becomes Marvel Entertainment. They're starting to grab their characters back. We're going to do it. We're on the road to Iron Man, which at the time was a road to Captain America. And we're starting. So they bring in Zach Penn to start work on the Incredible Hulk. They decide before it's even part of the MCU to make it a reboot. We're not going to do it. We're going to keep a lot of things the same, though. He's still kind of in South Africa. You could it almost is a sequel.
It really feels like it, watching them back to back.
It's very interesting what they chose to keep. And clearly, for a while, I imagine it was going to be like Ang Lee's Hulk was quietly the first MCU movie. We just didn't know. And now that's not a thing.
Right.
As I just sort of mentioned, Ed Norton came in to play the role, rewrote everything, which is part of all of his contracts, which is why he's not the Hulk anymore. And then The Incredible Hulk is finally released in 2008, the second movie in the MCU. And while we're not really talking much about MCU stuff, it is worth mentioning that that is the last time we've had a solo Hulk movie, no sequels, nothing else. And the reason for that is way, way, way back in the day, Universal snagged all these television rights, got that one movie right, and part of that contract is what they call first refusal to distribute. getting kind of under the hood of the incredibly complicated mess that is film production and distribution, Marvel Entertainment Company at the time and still today is just a production company, which means they can make a movie and they don't have access to theaters, AMC's, international, all the reasons you need big movie studios. Paramount was obviously doing it up in Spider-Man 3. Disney then bought them, got most of its distribution back. But this is what became the problem with 20th Century Fox, with Sony. Some of them played better than others. Sony and we're not making Spider-Man movies together. It's a great time. They obviously bought a whole studio just to get the X-Men and FF back. But Universal, for whatever reason, isn't playing ball. And what first refusal means is that whenever somebody sets out to make a movie about Hulk, anything with Hulk in the title, Universal gets to decide whether or not they want to distribute it, which means it's very possible that somewhere in the background, they've tried to make a second Hulk movie and Universal's just like, we're not doing that.
Nah.
It's funny because I do associate Hulk with Universal just because my favorite roller coaster is the Hulk roller coaster at Islands of Adventure. And so I always like make that connection.
I mean, it was like that was going to be their franchise, and it was their television franchise for 30 years almost. It's why would you give that up? But you know, they're now kind of, but I don't want to say butting heads because I just think they've given up. But the only way Disney can distribute a movie is if Universal passes. Obviously, they're not going to pass because then they don't make any money. And obviously, Disney is not going to buy another studio, nor I don't think they could legally. I also think of all the other studios, you probably couldn't afford Universal. But so here we are.
I also think
we're going to get him in Ragnarok and Avengers.
Yeah, we'll just shoehorn him here and put
I feel
him
like
here.
we're going to get a lot of him in She-Hulk, and like that's the workaround. Is just call it She-Hulk, and we have to find, now that we've seen Shang-Chi, why is Bruce
in normal
Bruce? Why isn't he Professor Hulk? So like I feel like there's got to be a lot happening in She-Hulk about Bruce.
It's interesting too. I feel like Disney picks and chooses its battles. Like they've tried, like they've seen the returns on Hulk a few times. They're like, look, this, yeah, we know this is a name, but this doesn't really bring in money like Spider-Man. Spider-Man, we can fine. We'll go to the table with Sony because we know this is like the Batman to the DC. This is our biggest guy. So if they make a movie and they get all the money, we at least know that on the toy side of it and marketing side of it, we're going to get all this back because Spider-Man's going to sell. They don't know that with Hulk. So they're like, look, we can throw him in on the few parts that we need him to, but we don't really need to go into it with this Universal to get this character off the ground. We don't care that much about it.
Which is a shame because I think in a post-Avengers Mark Ruffalo world, there are a lot of people who are like, bring me the Hulk. But I feel like it's also a weird character where most creative filmmaker types want to just be like, well, he gets mad, so we got to do something with that. And I'm like, we need a really creative person to get in there and do something really interesting and still have it. What I'm amazed by is that they just haven't. We figured like there's gonna be some weird legal thing where they're like, just call it Banner, and then it's fine.
Yeah.
I'm amazed that they just haven't figured out a workaround. But Terrence is right. The box office returns on the Hulk are generally lower than other characters. It just might not be a battle worth doing. But, you know, the return on the Hulk being low for Disney is the return on the Hulk being high for Universal, which is, you know, numbers are weird. So I could see why they're like, no, we want that money. And we want to keep our roller coaster rights.
Right.
Who wants to update rides? So it's a shame because I feel like, you know, we're mostly talking about the influence of shows and movies and TV, but this is one of the first examples that we're probably about to get way more into of the example of the history of Marvel's movies being directly affected by a time when they just divvied up the cards to studios and some people are just like, no, we're good here. We're going to keep it.
Yeah.
So but you know, that was the loophole to Daredevil, was make a Netflix show and then buy 20th Century Fox.
And then buy them.
But it's pretty crazy because these are the first two characters I feel like that even when they weren't done accurately, our Incredible Hulk TV show here and the Japanese Spider-Man, they still worked. Like there's just always something universal about who they are at their core and like the coolness of their characters. Like there's just always going to be something about, oh, fighting the monster within, and he has to have control that, you know, is relatable, because we all go to 9 to 5 jobs and like, well, I can't Hulk out here, am I right? Even
Yeah.
though it's obviously not the same. And Spider-Man's just a coming of age story that everyone connects to, and has that big theme that Spider-Verse is leaning into of anybody can be behind the mask, which is great. And I just think it's Spider-Man and the Hulk. One of them's a big green monster, and the other one's Spider-Man. They're cool characters.
And they're recognizable characters. Like, you know, when you see the Hulk, you know what that is, and you know what you're getting with that. It's weird because it's considered a flop just because people don't look on it well. But that movie opened at 62 million, which was very high at that point in time, and it was still like 200 and some odd $1,000,000. So it just had a huge drop the second week because word of mouth got out. But people were clamoring to go to it, especially after X-Men 2 came out, and they're like, yes, another one. But it just didn't meet the expectations, and that's why we look at it kind of as a failure. But the box office wasn't that terrible for it. It just should have been higher, because I think it's like 135 million to make, which is a lot at that point.
Decade spending a lot of money. Yeah, and then, you know, that's not even, they spent like $2 million on just a Super Bowl spot to start the marketing campaign.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like that. It's the return on that first Hulk movie is it's like what Batman versus Superman is now, where the amount of money it needed to make to be successful was insurmountable. And it just really is like, just make your movie for a little bit less. I don't know, it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where's my like Blumhouse horror $10 million?
Yeah. If you shave 45 to $50 million off of that, this thing is a winner. You're like, all right, cool, we're good. But when you get that high, and then you put P&E on top of that, you're like, well, Jesus, this is a failure.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's that Hollywood numbers are weird, and Hollywood contracts are weirder. But you know, it got us here, kind of. Like, these are the two characters that were fundamental in getting us into where the MCU is now, and both of them struggled with like getting them back to Marvel. But what would this What If episode have even been if they hadn't figured out these weird loopholes? Those are the two characters that you slapped on a comic book in the 90s to sell. Them and Wolverine. Those are probably your three biggest Marvel people. For a while, they were the only ones who even
for a while, that was the trio.
Games.
Yeah, that was the trio. That was it. Like Cap, Iron Man were like C to D list characters. Like those were the big three for them. And they would just strap, like Wolverine would literally show up everywhere they would put on. So like, yeah, that was their bread and butter. And it's interesting that those are the two that they somehow lost all the rights.
All
to.
Three of them. Three of
that's
those
right.
characters.
Logan was gone too. Yeah.
Which like kind of makes sense, because obviously when you're trying to not be bankrupt and you're going to go to these studios and go, here's a box of characters, they're going to go the big one. Like nobody was like, maybe we should buy Blade. Except for New Line, who then made a lot of money.
They did.
But it's, you know, like Blade set up the modern superhero movie, which we already talked about, but like Hulk and Spider-Man set up everything else in pop culture through these two shows and this movie. It's when you like think about the 90s, and almost every television show we had, they either accidentally connected back to this Spider-Man show, or just very, very openly were like, it's Lou Ferrigno's Hulk.
Yeah.
And it brought audiences together in a weird way. Like my parents, and my dad likes comic books, my mom was excited for Hulk. She doesn't care about half of these characters. Well, but like that was the show they watched.
Correct. I will say for the longest time, those two, Spider-Man and Hulk, were the longest two running that people just knew throughout decades for whatever reason, whether it be the show, whether it be the cartoon, like something attracted them to those characters, and they were always sort of the zeitgeist of Marvel. Wolverine came a little later because the X-Men cartoon got big and then he sort of exploded, but those were the big two for the longest. And so people of all ages knew them.
I forgot that Ferrigno is in both Hulk movies, which I love that.
It's like, you're so big, you're going to be a security guard all the time.
Yes. In 2003, I love that his cameos with Stan Lee.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that a lot. And especially now, like he's I think we've talked about this on here, that he's like he's kind of spicy about CGI Hulk. He's not very nice about it.
Too pleased.
But like, we saw you cameoing in those CGI Hulk movies.
You still got to check,
sir. Voice? Doesn't he do the voice in the Avengers? Isn't he the puny god line?
Yes. He's
All
been
right.
he's been the
Well,
voice
then,
of the Hulk a couple of times.
And I think definitely
recent
in
stuff.
the 03.
Yeah.
well, you can't be that mad. It's also like, the days of just having we don't have a Lou Ferrigno or an Arnold Schwarzenegger. I guess we have The Rock and John
Yeah.
Cena. Never mind. We definitely have the people who could do it.
Who could physically do that? Yeah.
At first I was like, well, there's just nobody who could do it. And I was like, oh no, there's people who could do it. It would be weird.
Yeah.
But because now like Chris Evans is the side, like he looks hulkish for
Right.
a normal person. So you can't just like if The Rock walked up next to him, it was like, I'm the Hulk, Steve. You'd be like, he's not the Hulk.
That's not
He's
the
just
Hulk.
a little bit bigger than Steve.
Yeah. No, it's true. Like Dave Bautista is our Drax now. So you're like,
he's the best, bulkiest the MCU
Right.
has. And
yeah. And even he's like, I'm done. I want to put on
yeah,
a shirt. I'm
he's
tired of working out.
He's so over it. Woo, that man wants nothing to do with this shit anymore.
Oh yeah. I mean, I get it. If I was him, I would also be tired.
Yeah. He's in his 50s.
I think he's like, I'm in my
And
50s. I'm
rich.
done. Like I went through wrestling and I had to work out every day of my life for decades. If I don't have to do this, I'm putting on a shirt and never getting in the gym again. I understand that. And that's why they use CGI characters for these these characters, because they're like, we want to use you for more than 1 or 2 films, but you're going to get tired of this real fast.
Well, guys, I think that's our episode. Unless anybody has more they want to say on the Hulk and Spider-Man and zombies, which I don't. But I do want more zombies, though. I mean, and obviously zombies and vampires are coming. We're getting Blade back. I think it's time. Like the one thing that Marvel hasn't really embraced is its like horror roots that it does
Supernatural
have.
stuff. Yeah.
We've gotten so much fantasy and sci-fi, and once we get to the Spider-Man movies, we're going to talk a lot about Sam Raimi and horror. So put it back in.
I'm going to use this excuse to rewatch Drag Me to Hell, which I haven't seen since theaters.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
It's a great movie. I mean, all of these things. It is now like, not that these have been like chores to get through, but now I'm like, great. Now it's just
now we're in for the greatest
Blade,
hits.
Spider-Man, X-Men. Like it is about.
And we don't even need to rewatch those.
No, a lot of those I'm like, I know them by memory.
I don't ever need to watch Spider-Man 2 again. But I probably will.
Oh, I'm gonna watch X2.
X-Men 2, I can recite verbatim. I'm like, I'm still watching this.
Yeah. And then I'll probably watch it again when No Way Home comes out. I didn't buy that 4K 3-pack to just have it look nice. All right, guys. Well, we will see you next week. Obviously, subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can see all of our other stuff there. Terrence's reviews and reaction videos for trailers. Jamie is at Podcast Zero at comicbook.com, where you can also read her work. I do another podcast called How Do You Figure About Toys? And if you want an even deeper dive into Power Rangers influence, there's a lovely episode there that I probably should have re-listened to for this one just to research, but I hate my voice. So you go forth and do it, dear listener. I'm at, as always, Blake. Terrence is at Terrence Tatum. Jamie is at Jamie Cinematics. And the show is at Hollywood ADI. And we will see you next week for...